know that you wrote the book Brain Magic, and that seems really interesting. And I was just wondering if you could explain what that's about.
Okay, well, Brain Magic is a little bit more about exploring the connections and the crossovers between our scientific understanding of the brain and neuroscience and consciousness and magic. And I basically attempted to collect exercises and rituals and so on that demonstrated various principles of neuroscience and magic at the same time. And also to take some of the scientific ideas and to develop some magical techniques from them that are maybe a little bit more focused and effective than some of the ancient stuff that we have. You know, I came up doing magic, you know, the old school way. I learned, you know, all the Goetia and the Golden Dawn stuff and Noki and things. And I love that stuff. I learned a lot from it. It changed my life in some very positive ways. However, as I came through it, I began to realize that some of this was people's personal experiences from long ago. And I'm not John Dee. I'm not Aleister Crowley. I have different personal experiences. And so by looking at the way our consciousness works and our brains operate and so on, we can develop much more personal and personally effective experiences for each of us. And that's essentially what I attempted to do with Brain Magic, was just give people some tools for developing their own personal systems, as it were, or to take some of the traditional systems and focus them down a little bit more, pair off some of the accumulated layers of history and notice what really works and what's important to the ritual.
Right, that makes sense. And I read on the website that it was, let's see, yeah, discoveries in neuroscience suggest the magical practices of evocation and invocation are based in natural brain functions. And what is that about? Like, what does that mean?
Well, we often take some of this. I mean, the common concept of these magical things is unfortunately derived from like what people see in the movies. Mm-hmm. And you know, you see in the movies, right? It's sort of this overblown form of Goetia where there's the magician. He's got this big circle with all these symbols in it, and you know, torches and whatever, and the demon appears. And you know, when we think about it, the ideas of both evocation and invocation are things that we do naturally almost all the time. These are normal kind of brain functions. One of the things I studied over the years was hypnosis, and the history of hypnosis parallels some of the history of magic in some interesting ways. Until recent years, hypnosis was very, I don't know, authoritarian and directive, right? You will go to sleep, you know, and for the most part, that worked with some people, not with other people. Some people get very touchy about, you know, being ordered to do the go to sleep. No,
yeah,
I'm not going. Yeah, right. There was a hypnotist in the middle, in the 50s and the 60s, basically, Milton Erickson, who really showed us that hypnosis could be, that it made use of these natural shifts in brain function and consciousness, and that things that we do all the time, but by consciously accessing them, we could create very specific kinds of altered states and get very specific outcomes. The same is true in magic. We have this whole tradition of these very complicated rituals of invocation and evocation, when in fact we actually do these things on a small basis, day to day. Now, invocation, essentially you have that idea of bringing qualities or deity into you, right? Of being inspired by the deity, right? An invocation to Ganesh, say, you would go into a temple of Ganesh, there'd be a big statue of the elephant head god, and you would be inspired by looking at it. You might sing a song or recite a prayer to Ganesh, and that brings hopefully some of the qualities of Ganesh into you, right? That you avoid your obstacles in life and develop luck and good fortune and so on. Now, we do that all the time in a less formal way, right? If you're in a bad mood and you want to get into a good mood, what do? You play your favorite song, right? Or look at some great artwork, or you read your favorite book. These are essentially the same kinds of functions that our brain is doing when we're doing invocation. We're bringing these elements into us and activating these same parts of the brain. Evocation, similarly, we often, our brains are wired so that every time we talk to another person, in a sense, we're performing evocation in a small way. Now, I'm looking at you on the screen here, and it's on my phone, and it's this little tiny image of you, yet I can ascribe intelligence to that image, and I can speak to this little image as if this were a real person, which I'm hoping that you are.
Yeah.
But I don't really know, right? This is only what my senses are doing, and it's an internal construct of you that I'm dealing with, not to mention a construct of pixels on a screen, right?
Yeah.
Right, but we can still have an intelligent conversation. Now, the way that our brains are wired to do that, we often tend to ascribe consciousness or sentience to other things that may be less sentient than somebody at the end of a Zoom connection, right? Have you ever gotten in your car and it didn't start and you talk to your car?
Yeah.
Come on, damn you, what are you doing, right? Or your computer is malfunctioning and you go, why are you running so slow today, right? Who are you talking to, right? In a sense, your brain is ascribing sentience to this thing that's external to you, which is really a form of evocation, right? It's not a very useful form of evocation, but it's what our brains are doing at that point. We can also take other aspects of our consciousness, our feelings, our emotions, and so on, and we can externalize them in a similar way, which is much closer to Goetia or traditional magical evocation, where we take some experience of ours and externalize it, and then carry on a conversation with it and learn from it. Whether or not these things are actually sentient and apart from us, I'll be an agnostic about that and say maybe, right? Because I've actually seen, I do this a lot with, I have clients, personal clients who I help with their magic and so on. And man, I have seen some really weird things doing these kinds of evocations with people. Sometimes their personal entities turn out to be Goetic entities and they've never studied Goetia, or Egyptian entities and they've never studied Egyptian magic and things like that. So maybe there's a collective unconscious that we're tapping into, or maybe there's some connection between all of us that we're able to sense in that way. But anyway, these are all based in our normal day-to-day brain functions, and it's more a way of focusing those functions or using them in a kind of constructive way, rather than the random way that we normally approach these things.
And so is the book Brain Magic, was that like a sequel to your book Meta Magic?
Yeah, kind of. Meta Magic was more focused on the evocation kinds of things, and Brain Magic and the invocation. But they could be read separately, or together, separately, in any order, or not at all.
Okay, cool. And so from Meta Magic, what is ATEM?
ATEM is the demonstration entity, right? The process of going through the exercises in the book, we use ATEM as kind of the subject of the evocation steps to basically demonstrate how this works and what's going on. By the end of the book, people should be pretty well connected to this entity. Call it a group mind or an egregore, or whatever you want to call it. And they should be able to get information from it and experiences from it and so on by the time they finish all the exercises in the book, and maybe even before that. So it's essentially one that I don't want to say created, but sort of contacted or came into contact with as a way to illustrate the book, in a sense.
Okay, yeah. I see that. Do you believe um, science and magic mix? Like, is there a hard line between the two?
I don't think there's a hard line between the two. I mean, we have, Arthur C. Clarke's famous saying that, magic is simply technology that we don't understand yet.
Yeah.
But I think some of us understand magic more than Arthur C. Clarke did,
Mhm.
maybe. Uh, Aleister Crowley believed that science was a subset of magic, right? That it was one of the tools. And he studied chemistry when he was in college, so he had a bit of a scientific background. And he used science, or rather scientific method, as his way of exploring magic, of learning about magic. So he had a pretty scientific attitude. You develop an experiment, you test it out, and so on. If we think of science more as that attitude of testing and observing, then yeah, they're very compatible. And I would highly recommend to people to have kind of a scientific attitude when you go into magic, maybe a personally scientific attitude. We don't need to have our personal rituals peer reviewed in journals or anything like that. That's
Yeah.
more academia than science. But it is important to create things as experiments and test them out and figure out what works and what doesn't, and so on, rather than just taking everything at face value and saying, oh, this is, Israel Regarding said this, so it must be true. Instead, test it out. Practice the ritual a few times. See if it meets your expectations. See if the things happen that people say they do. So on. Maybe they will for you. Maybe they won't. Right. It's kind of a personal scientific attitude. And I also believe that we can update our magic, and as I've done in the books, update our magic by looking at the science of what we're actually doing. Right. I mean, science still has not approached that, what they call the hard problem of consciousness. What is it? What's going on in our heads? We don't really know, right? We can see, by doing brain scan studies, we can see how the brain deals with things and how it uses perceptions and memories and so on, but we still don't know what that spark of consciousness is, right? But as science gets closer to that, and as we start to understand more of what's happening in the brain, it allows us maybe to fine-tune some of the things we do in magic and to approach some of that. And we've seen some of that over the years, even going back to Crowley or Regardie or something like that. They were actually aware of advances in psychology and in physics and so on. And Crowley read Einstein and wrote about it in a few places where his Einstein's ideas of the shape of the universe and so on, how that matched up with the Kabbalistic understanding and so on. So I do think they're compatible. I think there's something that we will call scientism, which is where people start to believe that the theories of science are these hard, ingrained things, whereas really in science, the idea is to have an open mind. A theory best represents the current facts, our current understanding of a situation. But as we learn more about it, theories are always updated, even the most fundamental ones about what is an atom, right? At one point, an atom was a little chunk of matter, right? Now we know it's these subatomic particles, but we don't know what those are. So we're still dialing in on it. And the theories continue to get updated and so on. And science is learning some really bizarre things about the universe in terms of quantum physics and things that may explain some of the odder things that happen in magic, like quantum entanglement and things like that, which Einstein called spooky action at a distance. And as a magician, I say, well, we like spooky action at a distance. Nothing wrong with that. So,
what is quantum entanglement?
What's a quantum entanglement is, in quantum physics, when they take two particles that are in contact, or one particle and they split it, they have a thing called the double slit experiment, where they split a photon and it goes through these two different slits. Now, if you observe a change in one particle, no matter where it is, the same change happens to the other particle at a distance. And they've demonstrated this over distances of some miles at this point. I think there's a lab in a physics lab in Germany where they've done that. This is under study for things like, you know, outer space communication and teleportation of things and so on. When you see those headlines that say scientists have teleported matter, right? What they've actually done is teleported information via quantum entanglement from one location to another instantaneously. It's pretty strange and bizarre stuff. And we're in the very early days of learning about it, but it could explain some of what goes on in magic. For instance, we have, in some traditions of magic, right, you would take, say, a lock of someone's hair, right, to make the magical link, the magical connection with somebody. If that's a real thing, right, it's quantum entanglement. So you have some piece of the other person that if you change something there, it changes something on them instantaneously. So maybe,
Oh.
right?
Okay, cool. And all right, yeah. So my final question is, how do you think cannabis affects the concepts outlined in Brain Metamagic? Like, how does it all come together?
Well, I do address that in High Magic. Again, the cannabis, it helps us to elucidate some of these brain functions that are going on. That difference between those two brain modes, executive function and the default mode network, are pretty important to all the stuff that I talk about in the other two books. And in High Magic, you can actually, I give exercises so you can actually use cannabis to understand that directly. You can experience the difference and the combination of these two different brain modes by doing some of these exercises. And as a result, your understanding of the stuff that's in the other books will come up much higher too. I do recommend, if you're going through like Brain Magic, for instance, go through it maybe without the cannabis first and get some idea of the rituals, and then take a look at what's in High Magic, and then you can go back and combine and pump up your rituals a little bit more that way.
Okay, I see that. All right, awesome. Well, is there anything else that you can think of to add that maybe I didn't touch on?
I do think that we are seeing this resurgence in cannabis right now. And again, this is a plant that has been an evolutionary ally of humans going way back. These two ethnobotanists, Mark Merlin and Robert Connell Clark, they wrote this amazing textbook. It's probably a graduate level college textbook called Cannabis, Ethnobotany and Evolution. And one of the really cool things that they highlight in there is that, all right, the one thing we didn't talk about is the usefulness of the cannabis plant, right? It's not just about getting high. The cannabis plant is the source of fiber and food and fuel and all kinds of other things that are absolutely necessary for civilizations to grow. Mm-hmm. And way back then, in the early days, people were, let's see, they probably discovered the psychoactive aspects of cannabis when they were foraging for food. They're picking the seeds out of the buds, and the sticky stuff would get on their fingers, and that just smells great, so we're going to try to eat it, right? What happens then? So people began to notice these changes. Now, Merlin and Clark give the idea that not only did the cannabis plant give us the fiber to weave, but it also gave us the cognitive leap, right? The ability to think outside the box, as it were. The box didn't exist back then, but thinking outside the box would enable somebody to make that cognitive leap that you could weave, that you could take these fibers and make cloth and clothing and rope and so on, right? It's a kind of creative leap. Mm-hmm. But that all started with the cannabis plant. And so probably some other aspects of our civilization as well may have sprung off from that early origin and those kinds of cognitive leaps. Historians of the Paleolithic talk about the Great Leap Forward, which was a time within the space of a few thousand years, when apparently the human race suddenly developed culture. We developed language and art and all kinds of things, just in the space of like some thousands of years. And what was it? Terence McKenna theorized that it was psychoactive plants, psilocybin mushrooms and cannabis in the diet of the early foraging humans who were suddenly thinking in new and unique ways, and so on. This is it's something that it has influenced us. Obviously, we have bred cannabis for certain purposes and so on, but it has also influenced the way that the human race has developed in very lasting and important ways. And it's still doing that. Right now, we're seeing this whole resurgence where it's becoming re-legalized throughout the world. And there's more people who are interested in smoking or using or eating or weaving or whatever it is with cannabis than ever before. And we're going to see some interesting things on the horizon as the human race starts to recover this ancient connection that we had.
Yeah, I certainly hope so.
Let's see. The other thing I would mention is that the books are available wherever books are sold. Go to your when local bookstores are open again. Go there and ask to order it. But if you want to save money, it is on Amazon.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. This was really interesting. I feel like I learned a lot. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Have a good one.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Bye.